the best brand of football in Idaho, this is the 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
That's right. Welcome in another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast, your weekly breakdown of the greatest game, the 8-man game, D1, D2 football at the 1A level here on IdahoSports.com. Brandon Baney is always joined by Will Hoenike. We're kind of matching today. We're both wearing blue shirts.
I'm really disappointed with the UCLA logo on yours, though. I'm going to give you the easy out that it's a gift that you feel compelled to wear from time to time.
Okay, yeah, I'll just keep my Bruin fandom to myself then.
Especially with a WSU Cougar alumni here on the other side of the screen.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. I one quick note about UCLA, and then we'll get to 8-man football. A couple of years ago, well, this was like 15 years ago now, a buddy of mine from high school played college basketball and track at the University of Mary. It's a D2 school in Bismarck, North Dakota. And they had John Wooden come and speak to the team. And he got a copy of Wooden's book, his autobiography, autographed, and gave it to me. So that was pretty cool. So I have that. That's a pretty treasured possession that I have.
That is
so
pretty cool.
Yeah. Anyways, enough bragging about me, because now it's time for me to apologize to 8-Man Nation, Will, because I messed up pretty badly. I feel like I'm pretty plugged into what's going on around the state of Idaho, not just 8-man, not just football, but soccer, volleyball. You know, I try to be as up to date on everything as I can, and some things slip through the cracks. And the 1A D1 football playoffs is one of those things that just slipped through the cracks, and I didn't notice. So if you haven't gone to the homepage at IdahoSports.com in a while, first of all, you should check every day. There's new stuff all the time there. But if you haven't, yesterday I wrote this big, huge article about the bubble watch, and basically an exercise of if the football playoffs started today, which teams would be in, where would they be seated, what would the matchups look like? And I did this for 5A all the way down to 1A D2. And along the way of writing this article, I discovered that the 1A D1 football postseason format had changed. And in years past, it had basically been the 5 district champions automatically get in, and then the next 6-7 best teams get the at-large bids, and it's based on your max preps rating. So some leagues only got 1 team in. The White Pine League, you know, sometimes got 4 or 5 teams in, and it really varied from year to year. Well, they've now gone back to the more traditional model this year of we're going to give more auto bids based upon, you know, districts and allocation and making sure there's equal representation among all the districts. And that's a big thing that the Idaho High School Activities Association really prides themselves on, is equal representation. And we see it in other sports, right? Some conferences are stronger than others, and some good teams are left home at the expense of others. And this happens across the board. Well, it's come now to football, where there's going to be 12 playoff teams, 9 auto bids, and only 3 at-large bids available. And this is a pretty big story. And I'll admit, it wasn't on my radar until yesterday when I started, you know, researching and writing this project. And for that, I am sorry. I should be better at being up to date on what's going on. And so some 8-man fans have known this for a while. Some are learning it right now as we're talking about it. But this is a big development that kind of went right over my head.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of it until you said something. I was under the assumption that last year's 5 automatic and 7 at large, which was going to shrink down to 4 automatic because there was at this point there was no District 1 in 1A. So there would just be a 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6. So there'd be, in my mind, okay, so now you've got 4 automatics and 8 at larges. I thought that made a ton of sense. And in the idea of being equitable, being fair, being balanced, I think if you win your conference, you get in. And then if you're one of the next 8 best teams, whatever that criteria is, they're using the max preps formula. So be it. You know what it is. You know the bar that you have to reach. The problem that lies here is now you're down to 3 at-large bids. The max preps formula, whatever that formula is, and it's not like they have a page saying here's how we determine it. You know, we have hints, we have little teasers of what goes in it, but the fact that we don't know exactly what goes into it, is going to make it really hard to figure out, why Team X is currying favor over Team Y. And we talked about it some last year, Brandon, as a 5-win Wilder team wasn't even really that close in terms of the Max Prep rankings when it was all said and done. It wasn't like they missed out by a whisker. They missed out. I want to say there was another team, but even before Wilder, to get one of those last at-large playoff berths. Well, now you've just expanded that tenfold, and I think that the what you laid out on the IdahoSports.com, where now District 3 gets 2 automatic teams, automatic bids in, and so you have Notice, who deserves to be there, absolutely deserves to be there, and I had laid out in my 8-man column that I saw a path where Rimrock could get in there and maybe play into position to get an at-large bid, and that was on the premise that there were going to be 8 at-large bids available. Okay, that they had a chance to play themselves into one of 8. Well, now District 3 has 2 automatics. So Rimrock, as we sit here today, it's Rimrock and Notice. Idaho City has a chance to kind of swoop in and get that second spot. We'll talk about that later. But now what you've got is Rimrock, quote unquote, in, and there are upwards of a half a dozen teams that have better Max Preps rankings that potentially could miss out in order for Rimrock to be in. And this is in no means, I'm all for when a team gets in, let them play. And I would love to see Rimrock. I would love to see the Raiders out there competing in the playoffs. This is not an anti-Rimrock. I'm using them strictly as an example here, in that if the idea is quote unquote fair, okay, 6 teams that are judged by your criteria to have better resumes are not going to the playoffs because this team finished second in their league. Can we make an argument whether or not that's really the definition of fair? I think there's at least a debate to be had.
Yep. And the same thing happens, like at the 5A level, right? The Boise schools,
Sure.
there are middle of the road Boise teams that will get into the playoffs ahead of good teams from the north or the east a lot of times because of they get so many spots being from a large district. So it's not an 8-man thing. It's not a Rimrock thing. This happens every year in every sport somewhere. Rimrock's just the example we're using this year because the numbers are what the numbers are. The Max Preps rating is what the Max Preps rating is. I think Rimrock's a good team. They've had some good wins this year.
They're fine. They're fine. And the reality is they'll probably finish with an above 500 record. So it's not like we're talking about a 1-win team or anything. However, and this, please do not take this to sound hypocritical because I banged the drum for Lighthouse Christian. I think that in a 4 and 8, which is what we thought it was, 8 at large, that they would probably find themselves in position to be one of the 8 at larges. Okay. Well, now with a 9 automatic and a 3, based on the numbers that you pulled, they're currently in at 0-5. And I think that, and I believe Lighthouse Christian is a good team. I believe there's a couple wins left ahead on their schedule, and it may render the whole thing moot when they win those games. But I think that that's going to raise some eyebrows when a Clearwater Valley team that is 4-2 is out, while a Lighthouse Christian at 0-5 is in. And it's purely an optical thing, right? There's a formula. We're relying on the formula, but it's not clearly stated what the formula is. So if you live in Koosky, if you live in North Idaho, and it's exactly what happened to Wilder last year, just except that it was in the larger, the more at large. We did what we could do. We won the games. Why are we not in the playoffs over this team that lost the games?
Yeah,
it's so just purely from an optics standpoint, from a visual standpoint, it may make, if they broke it out, like if there was a page that said, here is our A, B, C, D, E, whatever it is, the formula may make perfect sense. But without that, sans that, if we don't have that to look at, we're left to wonder how an 0-5 team that has played 5 incredible football teams, and they haven't exactly gotten destroyed in those 5 games, how an 0-5 team mathematically ranks higher than a team that's 4-2.
Yeah, and it's very close. I will tell you. I didn't include the Max Preps numbers, but for that last playoff spot right now, if the playoffs were starting today, Lighthouse Christian, their Max Preps rating is 35.4. Clearwater Valley is 32.9. Anything within 5 points, you can move with a win. So it's very close. They also have what's called the strength of schedule rating, and I don't know how that's calculated, but Lighthouse Christian has far and away the most difficult in all of it. Is 60.2 in strength of schedule. Clearwater Valley's is 28.2. In fact, the next closest team in terms of strength of schedule is Oakley at 53.2, and Oakley has played Kendrick. And so so that tells you that Lighthouse has really challenged themselves with the schedule. This happened last year where Lighthouse coming down the stretch was winless, and yet here they were like right on the cut,
in the mix,
on the cut line. So
yeah, and that's where I say we can't really, without knowing exactly what those formulas are. Like Lighthouse Christian, we've talked about this for a month now. With the first 5 games they had, 4 of the 5 teams are ranked, and the one that's not, well, they might be now. Grace might be ranked now. Are they in the top 5 now? So it's possible that every team that they've played is ranked. They have played. They have played the AFC West of high school football. They have played the best of the best. Anywhere from, 4-1 to 0-5, we could have made an argument for that a month ago. The fact that they're 0-5 is not a shock, yet we can still say they're a pretty good football team. But what I'm saying is if you are, and just to use these 2 teams, okay, if you are Clearwater Valley, if you're a Rams fan, if you're a Rams player, a Rams parent, we've played 6 games. We've beaten the teams that we should beat. Therefore, we're 4-2, okay? Yet we're scored lower than this team that's 0-5 that has, frankly, probably lost to the teams that they should lose to. But so because they lost to teams that a mathematical equation deems a little bit better, they rank better than the fact that we won games. I think that can be a really hard sell without transparency. And there's not a lot of transparency with this equation.
Yeah, it is. It's a big mystery in terms of how everything gets calculated, but it's going to be a very interesting discussion as we get through the final 3 weeks of the regular season. So let's just go kind of district by district and kind of look at where everybody's at. We'll start in the White Pine League because that's the hotbed right now. Mm-hmm. They get 3 automatic bids right now. Kamei, clubhouse leader, right? They're alone in first place. They're the only undefeated team. Right now, you've got a 3-way tie between Prairie, Potlatch, and Clearwater Valley. They're all 3-1 in league play. For this exercise, and I don't know how they would determine that because Clearwater Valley still plays Prairie and Potlatch, obviously. They play Potlatch Thursday, Prairie the following Friday. So the Rams, I didn't mean to alarm, fans in Kuski. Just for this exercise, I put them on the outside because technically Prairie has beaten Potlatch, so I put them second, and Potlatch was third. But it could finish in any order, really. Basically, you've got 3 teams that are fighting for 2 playoff spots, and the third team that doesn't get an auto bid may be on the outside looking in.
And realistically, you look at this week's schedule, you could make the argument that there are 2 playoff games. Clearwater Valley versus Potlatch, you mentioned on Thursday. And then on Friday, you've got Prairie taking on Lapway. You can argue that if Lapway wins that game, not only do they knock Prairie down a peg, but they jump themselves up a peg to the point where they're maybe in that conversation. And that's where things get really hairy now when you've got a number of teams. Logos, they've played well lately. Are they a team that can play themselves into that discussion as well? And so you've got a couple of games in the White Pine this week that they're not elimination games, but they're probably pretty close, depending on the outcomes of those games.
It just, I look at the White Pine and it's such a great league. And coming into the season, I was like, yeah, we could see 4, maybe even 5 teams from the White Pine get in the playoffs. And now faced with the reality that it might be 3 and that's it. Yeah. I don't know. That just, it just feels weird to me. And, Prairie is a team that's banged up right now. Prairie, it easily could be the team that's on the outside looking in. That's a very distinct possibility as well. So
Trenton Lawrence didn't play last week, and obviously that impacted them big time in that game in Cami. I don't know that he's playing this week. And you take him out against a Lapwai team that, for the most part, has shown the ability to put up a lot of points on just about anybody that they play. You're going to need all the weapons that you have at your disposal. So to take T.T. Kane's best athlete, his best running back, out of the mix, that's going to pose a really big challenge to that Prairie team. And whether it's Eli Hines or whether it's Colton McElroy, whoever it is, they're going to need someone to really break through and have a big game for them this Friday.
Yeah, it's like you said, pretty much if you want to be assured of a playoff spot, you got to run the table and win these next 3 weeks. Otherwise,
pretty close. You don't want it. And I'm a baseball coach, right? And we talk about it with our kids all the time. If you have 2 strikes, don't put it in the umpire's hands. Be ready to swing the bat. This would be the equivalent of that. Don't put it in the computer's hands, okay? You want to be in the playoffs, go take care of business. Go win football games, and you'll be in. It's really that simple. For all four, I would argue for all 4 of those teams. I think if Lapwai wins out, they're probably in. But definitely Potlatch, definitely Clearwater Valley, definitely Prairie. Those 3 teams, if they win out, they're going to be one of those top 3 teams. The thing is not all 3 of them can win out, just based on there's some crossover. They play each other a little bit. But if one of those teams does win out, they'll be in.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to watch, and probably gut-wrenching a little bit at the same time for those fans up north. All right, let's go to District 3, where we talked about they get 2 auto bids. Notice has got this thing locked up. And other than that, Will, it really is unsettled. Rimrock is the example I used because they're in second place right now, 2-0, but they've got the toughest games of the year coming up on their schedule. In fact, ironically enough, Rimrock, the team we're talking about, they don't play this week. They have a bye. Yeah. So that's kind of funny. You mentioned Idaho City. They play Wilder and Rimrock and Notice all over these last 3 weeks, where Idaho City could run the table and win the conference. Certainly, right? Mathematically, they could, but Rimrock took the first step by beating Wilder last week, but we could see these 3 teams beat up on each other as well and cause a 3-way tie for second place. And then what do you do?
Then you go into the transparency of that mathematical equation. For me, I think the whole thing comes down to that Rimrock Idaho City game in a couple of weeks. I think that's going to be the one that really decides it. And Rimrock has been playing much better of late. Sam Ward he's been very, very candid in the fact, hey, we've got room to go, but we're getting better, man. We're getting better. And Idaho City, with Brody Backus and also with Ian Rober and some of those kids that they've got there that they've been in big games before. That they're going to show up ready to play, and that they're going to be in the mix. So it's hard to say how that one's going to play out, other than the fact that even if something happens, you got to figure Notice is getting one of those 2 spots, period. Let's just go ahead and assume that there's not some sort of an earthquake where the whole town falls in a hole or something like that. Notice is going to be in. So it basically comes down to who gets that second spot. And I think the one that is probably going to go the farthest in determining, because Idaho City still plays Notice, and Rimrock both plays Notice. So let's cancel those 2 out. Well, those 2 play head-to-head. And whoever wins that game will have – we talk about inside track a lot. We talk about being in the driver's seat a lot, especially for Rimrock, because they have that 1 game up, having already beat Wilder. If they can turn around and beat Idaho City, I don't want to say that Notice game the following week means nothing, but it almost means nothing, because at that point you've locked up that second seed at worst.
Yep. And so you're talking about if Rimrock defeats Idaho City next week, they go into that finale against Notice with a lot to play for, and that's very exciting for the Rimrock fans, certainly. So we'll be keeping an eye on that for sure. District 4, they get 3 auto bids. For this exercise, I grabbed the 3 with the highest Max Preps rating. That's Oakley, that's Rat River, that's Cary. Murtaugh is right there as well, though. They're 4-1 overall, 2-1 in conference play. You feel good about 4 teams getting in from District 4. Certainly with the way Murtaugh's been playing. The game is next Friday when Murtaugh plays Cary. That will be a huge game that will probably determine that third auto bid from District 4.
Yeah, and this is the league where you can see somebody potentially getting left out, because you mentioned Lighthouse Christian. Based on Max Prep's numbers, they're in the mix for things as well. But there's a lot of good football being played down there. Raft River right now is a little bit banged up. They've got a couple injuries, but what do? They just keep finding ways to win football games. They're a good team. Oakley, one of the tops in the state, period. They're a really good football team. So you get down to where, your Murtaugh, your Cary, and your potentially Lighthouse Christian, or hey, what happens if Glens Ferry steals a win or two here down the stretch? But realistically, Murtaugh, Cary, and maybe Lighthouse Christian are probably the ones that might have an inside edge, so to speak. There, there's a reasonable chance that at least one of them is not going to be in the playoffs. So who gets it? Who gets it done? Lighthouse Christian has, in my opinion, the slimmest margin, but the biggest upside, because I think they've got to win games, but I think they've arguably got the most winnable games remaining, because they've already played Raft, they've already played Oakley, they've already played Cary, they've already played those teams. So now you're getting into the part of the schedule where head coach Jason Smith and his team should be going in saying, okay, here's our chance. We got to make some hay. And we talked about with earlier you got to take care of your business here. Don't put it in someone else's hands. That's got to be Lighthouse Christian's mantra here. If we want a shot, we have to win. We have to win. It's really that simple.
Yeah, their margin for error is none at this point. Murtaugh, just for reference, their Max Preps rating is higher than Prairie and Potlatch. So that gives you an idea of how good this conference really is. And we could be looking at the regular season finale, a Saturday night game in Twin Falls, Lighthouse Christian hosting Murtaugh. That could easily be a game where the winner goes to the playoffs and the loser stays home. Yeah,
that's a heck of a matchup right there. And like I say, we've been talking this one for months, that this Lighthouse Christian team, with their speed and with their athleticism, they have the potential to cause some teams trouble. And I think that their week by week over the season has borne that to be true. They can do a lot of damage, especially offensively. So you get into a one-game winner-take-all setting where Murtaugh can play a little bit, Lighthouse Christian can play a little bit. That might be a game that Idaho Sports might have to think about sending a crew.
Yes, we've already made a couple of tweaks to our broadcast schedule for this week. We're putting some high-profile 8-man matchups on that we will talk about a little bit later on in our D2 conversation. And then District 5-6, really it's Grace and Butte County. I think both are pretty solidly in the playoffs. For our projections, I had Grace as the quote unquote district champ because they have the higher Max Preps rating. Certainly Butte County could win that game as well. So, but I think, those two are both in. So when you look at the three at large bids, Butte County and or Grace is going to get one. Murtaugh and or Lighthouse, whoever the fourth team is from District 4 is going to get one. And that leaves that one spot left for possibly a White Pine, possibly a District 4. Somebody good is going to be, sitting at home for the playoffs. And so that's what is going to make this all really intriguing to watch down the stretch. I did a fun exercise too, Will, where I then took the projected field and said, okay, now seeding the teams according to Max Preps, what would the matchups look like? I thought this was kind of a fun exercise. This will certainly change a lot. This will be the thing that changes the most as we do this each of the last 3 weeks. But really, here's how it looked. Oakley would be the 1 seed. Kamei would be the 2 seed. Grace would be the 3 seed. Notice would be the 4 seed. Those are your 4 district champs, and they all receive first round buys. And then take a look at these matchups. Number 9 Prairie at number 8 Murtaugh. Number 12 Rimrock at number 5 Raft River. Number 10 Potlatch at number 7 Butte County. And a rematch, number 11 Lighthouse Christian at number 6 Cary. That'd be a pretty good slate.
That would be pretty good for sure. I think there's some other teams when you're talking about Clearwater and Lapway and whatnot, they're like, it'd be a little better if we were in there. And they would cause some definite challenges for a lot of teams in the field as well. But I think that I think especially with some of the matchups we have, particularly in District 2 coming up this week, I think we're going to know a lot more by this time next week, or we're going to feel a little bit more secure, a little more stable at this point next week. But there's a possibility, depending on how it goes, we could be throwing up our hands going, well, God, back to the drawing board, man. This thing's muddier than ever. But I think we'll be a little more stable. We'll feel a little bit more secure in which teams will most likely be in.
Yep. The other thing I was going to mention is that we talk about if teams get wins, could that boost their max prep rating? It could. I just don't know by how much. That's the other part we don't know. Like if Lapwai beats Prairie, that might jump them up 20 points. It might jump them up 2. I don't know how that's calibrated. So
and that comes back to the transparency issue.
Right.
And it's Kentucky Fried Chicken had their 11 herbs and spices, and they never exactly put it out there. But I think that's a little different in where, if you're, again, if you're Nick Holloway and you're Logos, it'd sure be nice to know going into these games how much ground we've got to make up and how can we make it up. You may not even really know what you can do to make up that gap. You may not know. And that makes things a lot tougher down the stretch if you're one of those teams eyeballing an at-large spot. So
let's move on to 1A D2 now, where, this bracket is so simple, right? It's already all built in. There's no at-larges. We know. I almost prefer this because at least going into the start of the season, teams know where they stand, right? And teams know where they're at, and you have to go earn it. Like, that there's X amount of spots available and, go get it. So
I gotta think about it more. Cause I personally was a fan of the district champs get in and then let's just get the next 8 best teams, whatever that formula you're using is. I was a fan of that. But it seems like it's the other alternative. It seems like going with 9 automatic and 3 at large. You're sitting on the fence maybe a little too much, but I want to see how it plays out because they may have it exactly right. When it's all said and done, they may have it exactly right. And, something to remember with those at-large bids, we're fighting over teams that are going to be in that 10, 11, 12 spot most likely, correct? So are these teams, it's like NCAA tournament times when people are complaining that, well, my team was a 7 seed. They clearly should have been a 6.
Right.
Tell me the last 6 seed to go to the Final Four. We're not talking about Oakley. We're not talking about Raft River. We're not talking about Notice. And I don't mean this disparagingly in any way, so please don't take it that way. We're talking about teams that are just fighting to get there, okay? Do they have long-term aspirations of playing deep into November? Maybe, maybe not. But, I've always said I'd rather be the ugliest kid invited to the dance rather than the prettiest one left at home. I would 100 times out of 100, I'd rather be there. But, I don't know. It's hard for me because I want to see the best teams in. At the same time, I want teams to have something to play for. And bringing this back around to the 1A Division II ranks, how many times have we used Clark Fork as an example of a team that goes 6-2, but knows by October 1st that they can't go to the playoffs because they already lost one league game. And having some semblance of a at-large pool probably eliminates that.
Yeah. I will say in terms of at large, quote unquote, Butte County or Grace is going to get an at large bid. If Grace got the at large bid right now, they'd be the 5 seed. If Butte County got the at large bid, they'd be the 7 seed. So that's kind of the one exception to the rule there, where good quality team, but it's a 3-team conference. So, but they both can play for sure. And we'll finally get to see them play soon, not this week, but soon.
Couple weeks. Yep.
Yes. Okay. 1A D2. District 1 gets 2 bids. Right now, that's Mullins St. Regis, 3-0 in conference. Clark Fork is 3-1. The big battle is next week. Clark Fork will take on Wallace. If the Wampus Cats win that, they pretty much sew up a playoff slot. 2 bids from District 2. We feel pretty good about Kendrick. And really, the other 3, Deary and Lewis County and Timberline are all fighting for that slot. They each have 2 conference games left. Lewis County has the easiest path only because they don't have to play Kendrick, and the other two have to play Kendrick. I really still do think it comes down to that season finale. Lewis County hosting Timberline, just like it did last year. We'll have to wait and see. District 3 gets 3 bids. Right now, Council and Garden Valley are both undefeated in conference play. They're both 2-0. And then Horseshoe Bend is at 2-1. And we've talked about Tri-Valley. They still play all 3 of those teams. So Tri-Valley could also play their way in. But those are really the 4 teams that are contending for the 3 playoff slots there. And then in District 4, they get 3 bids automatically. You called it last week, Will. You said everybody's sleeping on Hanson. It wouldn't shock me to see the Huskies, come out and get a win against Hagerman. And that's exactly what they did. So they're kind of in the mix now, although Camas County, Castleford, and Dietrich still remain the 3 favorites, right?
Yeah, they're going to have to pull an upset there. And again, you just, as a competitor, you just want the ball in your hands. You just want that chance to do that. And I guarantee you that the Huskies are anxious for this opportunity. Hey, why not? We're going to have to beat them eventually. Let's beat them now. It's going to be a tough challenge, but again, I would rather have the challenge in front of me rather than, be playing out the string, getting ready for basketball.
Definitely. So the big matchup this week is Castleford is taking on Dietrich, right? That'll essentially decide it for Castleford, right? If Castleford wins this game, they've already beaten Camas County last week, 26-8. That was a really good one. Castleford's defense, I think, has been overlooked at times this year. I think the most points they've allowed in a game is 14, right?
14, 12, something like that. Not very much. And I don't know that Camas County had been held below 40 something. And they went out there, Castleford, that is, they forced some turnovers. They slowed down Camas County's, offense just in general. They held them to 8 points total for the whole game. But, we've talked about it a number of times. Even in the 8-man game, at some point, you're going to have to make some stops. And Castleford right now in the D2, Castleford and Kendrick on paper have been the 2 best at that. And Castleford from that standpoint alone should not be ignored by any stretch of the imagination. Now, Dietrich has also been pretty good in that classification as well, as they have not given up a whole ton of points. Garden Valley has been very good in that respect as well. So who's going to give the defending champs the best punch? Which of those teams is going to be able to stand in there with Kendrick and trade punches the best?
Yeah, it's going to be very fascinating to watch it all unfold. On our Magic Valley Prepcast, which is specifically for District 4 athletics, Scott Burton, my co-host, reached out to Coach Lowry from Castleford, and he said he told Scott basically that Castleford really likes playing with the chip on their shoulder. Not that teams think they're not good, but it's because they have 12 players, Will, and that's it. They're a 1A D1 school enrollment wise, but they petitioned to play down at 1A D2 because they only have 12 players. Coach Lowry said, we get off the bus sometimes and there's more cheerleaders than football players. And they kind of they wear that as a badge of honor that, hey, we're one of the smallest teams out here and we're getting it done.
And it's been nice to see them have a little bit of an uptick after a few years where they struggled a little bit. But the thing here for Castleford that's going to bear watching going forward, you mentioned 12 players. I think 8 of them are seniors, a couple seniors, couple juniors, couple freshmen. There's, when this class gets through, they're going to have to hit reset on the old video game there a little bit. So, not that there's any more or any less pressure than there would be if they had 12 juniors on the team, but there's a bit of a, they're going to have to fight the perception that the window is closing on them because we've talked a lot about young teams. Kendrick is still a young team. Lakeside is a very young team. We've talked a lot about that. Garden Valley is pretty young. Tri-Valley is pretty young. Castleford's on the other side of that. They're a very veteran team. They've played a lot of football. They've played a lot of big games. And I think that experience is going to pay some dividends for them in the playoffs. But they've got to be ready come, next spring. There are going to be some big shoes to fill for Castleford.
Definitely. So Castleford is at Dietrich Friday night. We will be broadcasting this game live, free of charge on IdahoSports.com. It's Magic Valley game night from Dietrich. Oh boy, a pair of undefeated teams. This is going to be a fun one to watch, and you can at IdahoSports.com on Friday.
A great matchup. I've been on the Dietrich train from the beginning, and I'm going to stay on it now. Peyton Snedden, Cody Power, Connor Perkins. They've got a number of kids capable of making big plays. They can be explosive on offense. They can be tough on defense. They're one of the five. They're one of the top 5 teams in the state at the 1A Division II classification for a reason. It's not an accident. They very much deserve it. This should be a fantastic football game. One of the best 8-man football games, I think. Looking at it from the outside, looking in ahead of time, I think this has the potential to be one of the best games of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be a really exciting battle. And again, you can watch it on IdahoSports.com. And my projections for the bubble watch exercise that I did, I put Castleford as the conference champ just because they finished higher last year. I kind of deferred to last year where it was all tied up. So we'll see how that goes. I bring that up because that's exactly what I did in District 5-6. I have no idea how this is going to go. Rockland, North Gem, Water Springs, all look really good at times. Other times they've struggled, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. So kind of by default for this projection, I had North Gem as my league champ and Rockland as the second place team. There's 2 bids available, only because that's what happened last year. Now, am I saying that's what's going to happen this year? No, it could. It could be the exact opposite way, though, and we're finally going to get it all figured out. Water Springs will play North Gem this Friday. Then Rockland will play Water Springs next Friday. And then it is Rockland and North Gem to wrap up the season on the 21st.
Yeah, that whole district may come down to who takes care of the ball the best. If you look at, and I haven't gotten to see much video on any of those teams yet, but if you look at North Gem, if you look at some of their video, and if you look at some Rockland video, turnovers have hampered them, whether it's interceptions or whether it's fumbles. Turnovers have hampered them a little bit. So the team that protects the ball the best, that might be enough to give them the edge.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that all shakes out. So the projected playoff bracket that I came up with for this exercise, Council, I gave the District 3 championship to because they finished higher than Garden Valley last year. Garden Valley plays Horseshoe Bend on Friday in a pretty big battle that could be for second and third place for Garden Valley. It could be still for a championship. We're in the works to try and get you that game on IdahoSports.com. I was just texting to see if we had gotten permission from Horseshoe Bend yet to go broadcast. We haven't yet, but it's on our plans. So I would say check back on IdahoSports.com, click on the game streams tab to see, but that's our plan, is to go broadcast that Garden Valley Horseshoe Bend contest Friday afternoon as well, which should be a really exciting. So you could really do a double dip, right? You could watch Garden Valley Horseshoe Bend first and switch over to Castleford and Dietrich, kind of a double header.
Split screen it, man. Split screen it. Watch them both. Why not? Live the dream.
For sure. Okay, so in this bracket that I came up with, Kendrick, Council, North Gem, Mullen, St. Regis, they get the 4 byes. First round matchups, Camas County at Rockland. The winner of that would play Kendrick. Dietrich at Clark Fork. The winner of that would play Council. Horseshoe.
That's a tough drive right there.
I know, right? Horseshoe Bend at Castleford. The winner would play North Gem. And then I had Garden Valley at Timberline, and the winner of that would play Mullen St. Regis. So you're talking about, let's say that's really what it is. Garden Valley drives up to Weippe, beats Timberline. The very next week, they got to turn around and drive up to Mullen.
Yeah. I mean, and you would see if this was the NFL or something, they may just stay up there, but that's not how it works in 1A high school football in Idaho. They're going to have to get on that bus. They're going to have to go all the way home. And I mean, I guess the good news is it's Garden Valley, so you're already north of Boise to start with versus, I mentioned the Dietrich at Clark Fork. You're going from basically not as far south in Idaho as you can go. I mean, you're basically going from Twin Falls almost to Canada. That's a long, long way to go. And then whoever wins that game then has to turn around and go play Council, which is, that's going to be a healthy drive for either one of those teams.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me to see all the teams from the north get to host, whether it's Mullen, Clark Fork, Wallace, Lewis County, Timberline, whatever. They get to host in the first round and the quarterfinals. So that'd be pretty interesting
Mm-hmm.
to take a look at. But again, we'll update the bubble watch next week and have a little more data to work with, certainly. But I thought now that we got to October, Will, this was the time to really start looking ahead and start making plans for the playoffs and figure out the situations and the breakdown. And so needless to say, there's a lot of good football still left to determine where we're at.
There's some great games coming up, and I'm looking forward to them. And I'm excited to hear that you guys are going to be able to broadcast a number of them, and I'll be able to sit from the friendly confines of my living room. I've got a couple different screens I can pull up and can just watch the games and then have fun.
Yep, it's going to be a lot of fun for sure. So big thanks to all of the 8-man football fans that tune in each week. We do it for you, the fans, to give you the good content. And we'll be back next week for another edition of the Idaho 8-man Prepcast. Until then, enjoy the competition this weekend, everybody. For Will Hoenike, I'm Brandon Baney, and we'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.